Season 14 of Rupaul's Drag Race has been a rollercoaster of a ride since the start of the year, and with it finally ending after what felt like a lifetime, I still want to talk about it. I'm going to split this video up into various sections to talk about specific topics, so hopefully I'll remember to put in time codes in the description if you want to skip to a specific section. This season has been received in a lot of different ways, and obviously I can only really speak to my experience about watching it and how I felt, so take with that what you will. Before we get into it, here's some context to what my perspective was going into the season, as it definitely had an effect on what I thought each week with the challenges, who won, the cast, all of that. I've already mentioned this in my other video. I'm part of r/spoiled drag race, aka where you get all the spoilers and where all the YouTubers and Instagram accounts get their spoilers from, and I knew about the season for a long time and the cast and the challenges and all the twists and stuff, and I thought it'd be the messiest season ever. So I had low expectations going into it other than just enjoying the whole messiness of it, because on paper when you're told about the chocolate bar twist plus the Lollapalooza plus all the non-elimination episodes, all I thought at the time was like, this season is not going to be received well at all, but I'm still going to live for the messiness. However, we didn't know the edit or the specific challenges and how they would play out. We only had the foundation of everything and that was it. So in the words of Rupaul,
I can't wait to see how this turns out.
this may be recency bias, but God, is this cast stacked with excellence? I felt the same with the past casts of season 12 and 13, and now season 14, but the talent and excellence seems to grow each year. I think that's also thanks to partly how much later the eliminations start in the seasons. It allows us to have more time with the cast and for them to show their runways they spent a lot of time on and used a lot of money for. I know people complain about seasons going on for years and the lack of eliminations, but at least we get to know the queens more and none of their times are cut too short. But in general, this cast is so talented. Before going in, I only knew of Cornbread and Lady Camden, and there were two queens that had past connections to previous contestants, being Willow Pill with Evie Oddly and Diabetti with I'll Give You Two Guesses Who. Kerry Colby was also well known for being the daughter of the legendary Sasha Colby and being part of the House of Colby as well. Compared to the past two seasons, the cast had a majority of lesser known queens, which made it more exciting as we had no idea what they would bring and there were no expectations to be set. When we first found out who the cast was back when on the subreddit, I remember following a couple of them, but I remember the one who mostly showed up on my feed and I followed the most was Angeria, and seeing Angeria just dominate the first half of the season was so amazing, and even in the second half she was such a standout. One absolutely surprising thing that I never saw coming is how Bosco has literally become one of my favourite queens of all time. No kidding at all. I literally want to start drag because I finally found someone who encompasses and just represents the drag I'd love to do. Also, she's funny, she's charismatic, and even in her flop era during the season, I still loved watching her. She's just so cool and hot and beautiful and amazing. I'm such a Boscarina and the lifestyle is great. Daya and Jasmine were like the most fun this season because they brought the drama and the TV gold to this season, as well as all the charisma and just talent and everything. Daya's not giving a fuck attitude was so refreshing to watch as she had her eyes on the prize and not just playing Rupaul's best friend race. Jasmine I could relate to all the time. I love how she always stood up for herself and she gave us some of the most iconic and quotable moments this season. Thank you to her and Maddie for that iconic moment in Untucked. Speaking of Maddie, I know at first there was a lot of upset that she was a straight cis male, which is completely understandable. That should be more directed at the actual casting of the show rather than the people who are casted, because that's not their choice to make. But I feel like throughout the season and throughout her time on Drag Race and even off the show on social media, Maddie has shown why she's a great drag queen and also understands the community she's in and also knows her boundaries and understands that. I think at the end she has been a really good sport and I'm so glad she was on it because at the end of the day she's a talented person. One of my favourite things this season though is watching Lady Camden grow and prosper each episode. I love how she was such low-lying competition at the start with some inkling of she seems to be good competition, then as the week progressed she unravelled herself as being extremely strong competition. I mean, we already know her storyline, seeing her get the highs and save Queen and Glamazon, then from Daytona Wins onwards she just did amazing. It was so fun watching her. Willow Pill was the light and the angel everyone needed at this time. I fell in love with her as soon as the first episode started, and watching her kill this competition each week, not just in the challenges but on the runway as well, was amazing. I love her humour and her perspective of drag and how she could talk about her struggles with her chronic illness and disability and be a representation for people who struggled with similar situations conversations, because we rarely get that, not just on Drag Race but on reality TV, media in general. Kerry Colby is such an inspiration to me to live your true self and just be happy, and she proved that by just being here on the season. She has made one of the biggest impacts on Drag Race, and I think that's more important than anything. The whole cast was also the reason why this Untucked was so fun this season. As a mix of fights and catty moments with some of the most heartfelt ones as well. I could go on and on about this cast because of how amazing they are and how they all brought something different to the show and stood out in their own field. Please go support them all, no matter what place they came in. They are the biggest reason why the show and this season is a success. After thinking about it for a while, I can confidently say that this season has some of the best challenges we've had in a long time on Drag Race. None of the challenges were boring to me, and they were all entertaining to watch. Starting off with the talent show for the double premiere instead of a runway and then a cast song was interesting, as we normally say that for All Stars. But what I liked about it is that it allowed the queens to show why they were chosen and what they have to show, which allows the audience to understand their drag and performance style right away. Cornbread and Willow being the obvious standouts for me. The Save the Queen episode was such a fun idea, and it's also really fun to see the first outs having fun on Drag Race again. Jack Fed has a really good video on the significance of this episode in relation to possible future Drag Race projects, so I recommend checking that out. The Super Teas and the Daytona Wins acting challenges are some of the best acting challenges we've had in recent years. They had a perfect mix of not taking itself too seriously with it actually being funny and having good writing. Part of that is because the queens wrote their Super Teasers themselves, and maybe Drag Race finally got good writers for acting challenges. Both episodes in themselves were amazing, especially Daytona Wins. Challenges like the DragCon panels and the Glamazon Prime sewing challenges are always good to watch because they show what drag queens do best. I always love watching people take random junk and rubbish and make an outfit out of it, so I enjoyed the Glamazon Prime challenge a lot. And the DragCon panels are always a perfect mix of humour and actual good conversations, and these ones did actually feel really insightful. Obviously, staple challenges like the Brawl, Snatch Game, the Rusical and the Roast can never go wrong, and they just made the season even better. Whilst I wasn't on board at first with the Brawl having two categories at first, you know, splitting the premiere groups, the overall collections of looks were great, and there were none that were absolute travesties. I mean, we also know what happened with Snatch Game this year, and whilst we always need to thank Deja Sky for saving that episode, it did lead to one of the best episodes that season, and I really enjoyed the judges critiquing bit because they seem to just have fun with the fact that like so many people did bad and just kind of like make fun of it. The Rusical was a massive improvement of last season's and is up there as one of the best in my opinion. It felt like the Madonna Rusical, even though I feel like Madonna Rusical is still the best and nothing can beat that. It felt like, yes, there could have been bottoms, but at the same time no one did bad. Like, everyone got the choreography right, everyone was still at a high energy, and everyone did well. The results of the episode should have just been Leland being bottom one, let's be honest. And with the roast, whilst there were no iconically bad performances, I think it is still really good. Roast episodes are always my favourite anyway, and I just want to thank Willow and Bosco for jokes that I will definitely steal. And the top 4/5 episode, it can normally be a drag and just be a bit of a slog just to find out who's in the final, but the catwalk music video shooting and it being more difficult than previous seasons made it more interesting for me. Also, because I loved the top 5 so much at this point, I was just content watching them being their talented selves again and again. The challenges overall were a big improvement for the main series for the past couple of years. I actually laughed and enjoyed watching them instead of usually skipping due to the boomer humour induced cringe in a lot of the past season ones. It's just a mix of putting thought into making these challenges good, plus realising what show you're producing and not taking things too seriously. The world is your runway. Coming off a season where you have had some of the best runways and looks ever from the mainline series, I think it's fair to say that nothing could really live up to the level of season 13 runways. So I was content with what we had, and I think what we got from the season 14 runways overall was fine, and it's important to take into context the difference between the amount of connections season 14 had compared to season 13, aka there was a lot less connections these queens had. Bosco, in her Billboard interview, had a really good point about getting prepared for runways on Drag Race. Clearly not all the queens had the amount of contacts nor money to get the high level of looks we had last year, and I think we, as the audience, need to keep that in mind when watching the show. There were some outstanding pieces and just some really good pieces and people who definitely brought it to the runway each week, but I think overall the runways were fine. I think what brought it down compared to last year were the runway themes not really being specific or them changing it at the last minute. The ones that come to mind is Heart On. I just really did not like that prompt at all. The shoulder pads and Mirror Mirror, whilst great, I feel like were let down because I felt like a lot of queens just did miss the assignment a bit. And whilst there were some good runways in that category, majority of the good ones were the ones that missed the prompts or didn't quite meet it, therefore it's just kind of like an for me. And apparently with Holy Couture, the queens said, and a lot of people said, that the runway was originally supposed to be like What You Worship or something along the lines of that, and was changed last minute, which is why we got that runway. Like I said, there were great runways in those categories, but with some of them not meeting the runway prompts, it just brings them down a little bit for me. However, the best runways for me were the signature drag prompt from the first 2 episodes of the premieres, the Chaps runway, the Tutu runway, and your finale drag in the top 5 episode. Those have some of my favourite looks this season. I am in no way a fashion expert or do drag, even though I really want to, so I don't believe that the majority of these looks these seasons are bad and the queen should ever get any sort of hate or flack for it. I think obviously compared to last year's it didn't live up, but at the same time that's fine because of context, and queen should never ever have to like be pressured to give like $1,000 runway looks every week, because people just can't do that. There were so many twists and so many episodes that I really don't know how it would impact the season, whether it be for worse or for better. I think the majority of them worked, but I'll go through each one to give my thoughts. The chocolate bar twist. I think this could have made or break the season for a lot of people, but really I feel it was less impactful than it was made out to be in the promo. Partly because the season just shone in so many other areas that the majority of people forgot about the twist until the end of the episode when the eliminated queen had to unwrap it. Did it work? Kinda. If I had to pick a flaw of the season, it would probably be this. I don't think the chocolate bar was as interesting as they made it out to be, but it didn't affect the enjoyment of the season for me. And my favourite queen from the season got the golden bar, so I'm not complaining one bit. I think the main reason why it wasn't as massive of a moment that the production wanted it to be is because we already had 5 episodes when no one went home, including one double shantay already before the chocolate bar even happened. The chocolate bar realistically should have been the one and only double shantay of the season. Speaking of lack of eliminations, it was kind of like swings and roundabouts of me. One way you could look at it is that it draws out the season too much and just doesn't feel like a tight competition at all because there's no stakes or tensions if no one's going to be going home. I mean, another way you could look at it is that we get to see the cast stay for longer, as I mentioned earlier. These queens get to show off a lot of the drag they bought instead of staying for only 1 or 2 episodes. Plus it also showed how strong this cast was in the latter half of the season, which for me made it more tense as I had no idea who was the clear frontrunner. I didn't mind the lack of eliminations as much as others, but I understand why people felt that way. Also, whether the chocolate bar twist was rigged or pre-planned, we can really never know because there is a chance that Bosco just did get lucky with chance and had the golden bar, but you can also argue that the producers would never want to play it that early, so they wouldn't ever take the chance for it to be random, so they'd give it to someone who was deserving to stay. Speaking of so-called production work in this season, the Lollapalooza, which by the way is probably one of my favourite lip sync tournaments along with All Star 6s. It's hard to say whether this was planned after Snatch Game no matter what happened or not. I think the fact that WoW ordered 16 episodes this season suggests that it was always planned, and if it was planned they probably do it at a time when they were not doing that well or just plonk it somewhere in the middle. Luckily for the producers though, they did actually have a week where everyone but Deja did bad, and voila, the Lollapalooza happened. And the reason why the lip sync tournament worked for me is because someone for definite was going home and it was all the remaining girls participating, no eliminated queens this time. There were real stakes, and the 2 queens who were performing worst at that time were the best lip syncers, so the most likely outcome would be a shocking elimination. Basically what I'm trying to say is that I think it worked well and it's one of my favourite episodes this season. The top 5 episode with the 3rd double shantay of the season was surprising at first, but in hindsight it wasn't surprising. I knew from the spoilers after the season had filmed that Willow and Jiri were in the bottom and they filmed all the outcomes, but this was without knowing how the season played out and how the queens performed plus the fan reactions. So when they probably had the 2 fan favourites of the season where they had the exact same track record and had performed great in the competition, there was no way they were getting rid of them. And thank God for that, because the idea of someone in the top 5 not being in the final feels wrong. But I also hope that this top 5 is a one-off for this season only. I also think that Cornbread leaving due to her injury definitely caused some changes with the episode lengths and having an extra normal elimination episode. Overall, the season's twist could have been a hit or complete miss, but they were mostly hits in my eyes. I just think they were more successful compared to previous seasons, but they were very close to jumping the shark. I also want to talk about the final structure quickly as they finally changed it up for the first time since season 9. I think this is the best way by going forward for the finale. It's similar to the season 7 and season 8 ones, which were received very, very well because of the individual performances. It lets the queens stylize and play to their strengths by having their own number and performance, and it's not bogged down by obvious reveals and lackluster lip syncs. I also felt like there were real stakes in the finale because any of the performances were win-worthy for me, but I also understand why the top 2 were the top 2, and the final lip sync was a great cap off to the end of the season. Just wish they used the original ABBA version though. A lot of the storylines didn't have a full season arc except for maybe one, and a lot of them took place over like a couple of episodes, but what we got from the small storylines was still great, and we have some of the greatest episodes in terms of how the narrative played out. In my Who Will Win Season 14 video, I went through the top 5 storyline, or how I interpreted it, and I think they still hold up. I still think Willow has the strongest storyline or journey this season, as it starts with her first episode and ends in the finale with her winning. And that's like the storyline I think that lasts throughout the season and works the best. The rest of the top 5 had storylines, but they started in the middle of the season or ended before they were eliminated, so they weren't as impactful as Willow's was going into the final. I think Daya's journey from being first eliminated to being such a formidable competitor is such a fun watch, especially when she was in the competition mode and not Rupaul's best friend race mode when approaching each challenge, which by the way made the season 10 times more fun to watch. Her clashing with Georges and Jasmine when she's frustrated at her position in the competition, only for her to beat them and basically send them home in a lip sync, was so fun and added to her journey as well. Camden's story of being the dark horse of the competition and just blowing people's expectations out of the water in the second half of the season was the most exciting. There are so many little arcs throughout the season, but this video is already too long so I won't go through them all. I think they all handle the storylines and edits well this season, but it falters in creating full season narratives. Like I mentioned, going into the start of the season, I had low expectations when it came to how the season would be produced, and was just ready to enjoy how messy it would be. And I think it was having these low expectations made the surprise of everything else this season more impactful. Therefore, I enjoyed this season a lot more than I thought. The only way I can describe this is to compare it to my experience watching season 13 last year. Like season 14, I knew the main spoilers for season 13 going in, and yeah, season 13 was fun to watch and I enjoyed most of the cast and engaged with them on social media, etc, etc, but it was nothing more than a fun watch for me each week, and I just kind of left it there. And I think I wasn't the only one who knew Simone was winning from the 4th episode onwards, which she deservedly so did. But I didn't think about it too much, as nothing really excited me or engaged me to rewatch the episodes again. But with season 14, I was hooked each week, even with knowing everything. This was a mix of the cast being amazing, the challenges being better than usual, and the twists actually creating stakes that made it way more interesting to watch. I was anticipating it each week, even with knowing the spoilers, and I think the fact that I was still surprised each week and how the episodes played out, as well as enjoying it more than usual, showed how amazing the season was. I can't really rate where this stands out of all the seasons yet, as I think it's a bit too early to call. The most important part is to see how much it stands up after a couple of months. This is mainly because I'm still on the high of watching the season play out, plus recency bias might skew what I actually feel about it, but I know it's above average out of any season in any franchise for me. What I do know is that Drag Race isn't going anywhere and it's still a great show. I think a lot of people were getting worried in this overproduced Drag Race era, and yes, whilst season 14 has a lot of production involvement, I think they managed to handle it in the way, for the most part, that makes it work and makes the season more engaging and interesting and raises the stakes well. I feel like production had found almost a balance of changing the game to make this each season unique, but also keeping the successful foundations of what made Drag Race so good in the first place. So I am hopeful for the next coming seasons and the Drag Race franchise as a whole. So congrats to Willow Pill, she absolutely 100% deserved the crown and fought every single episode for it, and I cannot wait to see what her reigning year holds for us. And thank you to the rest of the cast for creating such great TV, being solid competition and being entertaining each week. There's no doubt this could become one of my favourite seasons in the whole franchise, and I guess we just have to wait and see how it holds up in the next coming months.